I'm Dr. Stephen Nathan. I work at Inova Fairfax Hospital, which is in Falls Church, Virginia, and that's really the Washington, D.C. suburbs. Our hospital is a large tertiary care facility, just under 1,000 beds, where we see patients with various forms of advanced lung disease. We have a fairly robust lung transplant program, as well as clinics for patients with interstitial lung disease, pulmonary hypertension, COPD for lung volume reduction surgery. We also see a handful of patients with sarcoidosis and many forms of advanced lung disease. We do transplants, but I always like to say that I'm in the business of putting myself out of business. And what I mean by that is we do everything we can to avoid having to transplant patients. Transplantation is not the panacea. It does carry with it significant risks of morbidity as well as mortality. The 5-year survival is still only around 50%. So we want to make sure we do everything possible before we subject patients to the risks associated with transplantation. The more options we have for patients to avert transplant, the better. And a perfect disease where we've made a significant impact is pulmonary arterial hypertension. If you look at the data from the International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation, in the early 90s, about 10 or 12% of our patients who we transplanted had PPH at the time. If you look more recently, in 2005, 2006, only about 2 or 3% of the transplants we do are for patients who have IPAH, idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. And I believe that's a direct attestation to the fact that we now have some fairly effective therapies for pulmonary arterial hypertension. We're not there yet. There's still patients who advance, need transplant. There are other patients who die of their condition because they're not transplant candidates. So we've certainly got a ways to go in terms of coming up with additional therapies for pulmonary arterial hypertension. But the reason I mentioned PAH is because I think that's an example of where we need to be going with these other diseases. Interstitial lung disease, IPF in particular, we don't have any therapies, and a lot of those patients are needing transplants. A lot of them are dying before transplant, and some of them are dying after transplant. So we need to put in similar medical safety nets to avert the need for transplantation in patients with IPF, as well as other conditions like advanced sarcoidosis. The more safety nets we have in terms of medications and otherwise, the more options we have for catching these patients before they fall to the final safety net of transplantation. And certainly after transplantation, we don't have any safety nets. For example, a lot of the patients develop chronic allograft dysfunction, bronchiolitis obliterans in particular, which is thought to be chronic rejection, and we don't have any effective therapies to either prevent this or to treat it once it develops. So if you look at the spectrum of advanced lung diseases, you can regard it as advanced lung disease prior to transplantation, transplantation being a trade-in of one disease for another. After patients have a transplant, we give them transplant disease, and then we have to manage the complications of transplant disease, with chronic rejection, bronchiolitis obliterans being the major complication after lung transplantation. So that's certainly a missing element in what we have to offer patients in terms of having options for their disease course after they develop chronic allograft rejection. The only thing we have at this time is to do retransplants. However, retransplants, the results aren't as good as the primary transplant, and then anytime we retransplant someone, we're taking an organ or organs away from patients who might be waiting for their primary transplant. So I think when I think about advanced lung disease, and if I had to look at myself in regard to what my practice is, I'm an advanced pulmonologist. I don't mean advanced by technical or academic accomplishments or otherwise. I mean, I'm seeing patients who have various forms of advanced lung disease, from all the ones I mentioned through all the way through transplantation. And we have made some significant inroads in terms of therapies for pulmonary arterial hypertension, but we need to do the same for other forms of advanced lung disease, as well as for patients who go on to receive transplants. That's all I have to say. Hopefully that was succinct and deliver kind of message to anyone who's following this video. And I'd like to thank Mana Biotech for this opportunity to be here and learn more about opportunities of different agents that might be useful in our patients. Thank you.